This lesson is to give you some background for the next class period on South Carolina and the Nullification Crisis. Please follow along on your handout and answer the questions as we go, and feel free to stop the screencast whenever you need to. In this lesson, we will discuss the state of the nation prior to the Nullification Crisis, John C. Calhoun, and the South Carolina Exposition and Protest. We will also talk about the building tension between the Northern and Southern economies, and finally, the South Carolina Nullification Act. Prior to the Nullification Crisis, the U.S. was going through some changes. First of all, there were changing attitudes towards slavery. Fewer people approved of slavery, and tensions were rising between the pro-slavery and anti-slavery factions of the U.S. Congress and all people across the country. In 1819, Missouri requested admission into the Union as a slave state. However, this threatened to upset the balance between slave states and free states. So, Congress put together a two-part compromise. This granted Missouri's request to become a slave state, but also admitted Maine into the Union as a free state. The Missouri Compromise also passed an amendment that drew an imaginary line, as you can see here, across the former Louisiana Territory. This created the boundary between free states and slave states. Slaves gradually being emancipated in New York also had a large effect on how people felt about slavery. Before the Nullification Crisis, the South was struggling economically. In 1828, cotton prices were 1/3 of the price that they were in 1815. As you can see here from this picture, each dot equals 1,000 bales. So with this much cotton being grown in the South and prices being cut that much, you can imagine what an impact that had on the South's economy. And this forced a lot of small farmers to sell their farms as well. Another change in the U.S. during this time was the Tariff of 1828. And this tax law was passed by the U.S. Congress and raised taxes very high on imported goods to discourage imports and protected Americans' manufacturing industries, and most of these manufacturing industries were in the North. However, the South was harmed because they had to pay higher prices on these goods that they did not produce, and it reduced the exportation of British goods to the U.S., which made it hard for the British to pay for the cotton that they imported from the South. In this way, the 1828 protective tariff appeared to favor the North. As you can imagine, this made a lot of Southerners upset. One of these Southerners was John C. Calhoun. John C. Calhoun was an American politician. In 1828, he was vice president under John Quincy Adams. At this time, in response to the Tariff of 1828, John C. Calhoun wrote the South Carolina Exposition and Protest. He did not go public as the author at the time, but the information was soon leaked that he wrote the document. The South Carolina Exposition and Protest stated that if the tariff was not repealed, South Carolina would secede from the Union. The document also defined and supported nullification. It stated that the federal government was the creation of the states. In agreeing to federal government, the states had ceded some of their powers, but only conditionally, and always reserving the right to do whatever was necessary to ensure their survival as distinct political communities. This argued that the state government had no power over the federal government. The document was distributed, but the legislature took no action at the time. Meanwhile, tension was building between the Northern and Southern economies. Southerners offered Westerners lower prices on land if Westerners agreed to oppose the Tariff of 1828. Then came the Tariff of 1832. This tariff lowered the prices on many goods, but not on iron and textiles. However, the iron and textile industries were mainly in the North. This, once again, led Southerners to believe that the Tariff of 1832 was the government protecting the economy in the North. Adding to the tension was the Nat Turner Slave Rebellion that took place in Virginia in 1831. This was the first slave rebellion to actually take place and caused Southerners to be scared of future rebellion. This rebellion just put added pressure on the South. All of this led to the South Carolina Nullification Act in 1832. This act was declared by the power of the state of South Carolina and stated that federal tariffs of 1828 and 1832 were null and void in South Carolina. In reaction to the South Carolina Nullification Act, Congress passed the Force Bill. This authorized the use of military force against any state that resisted tariff acts. However, in 1833, a tariff was passed down as a compromise tariff. This act stated that import taxes would gradually be cut until 1842, when import taxes would match the levels set in the tariff of 1816. So there's a little background information on the South Carolina Nullification Act and what led up to that. Go ahead now and rewind the screencast if you need to finish filling out your handout.